Hello, I'm Michael Williamson, president of the Richmond Football Club from 1974 to 1985. He is a life member of the Australian Football League. He was on the Richmond Committee from 1964 to 1985. He was league director for Richmond from 1972 to 1977. He also served as vice president of the Richmond Football Club. Now, first of all, Ian, how did you come to Richmond?
Oh, it's very, very easy. Graham Richmond shanghaied me here. I arrived at the football one day and about 64, and Graham saw me in the crowd, and we'd been old school friends, and he said, come down here. I met Ray Dunn, and I think by the end of the day I was on the coterie and involved.
You're putting your money in other words.
Right, yeah.
That's Graham Richmond.
Yeah.
It intrigues me, you and he, both Geelong grammar boys,
Yeah.
and I mean this kindly, but coming into a working man's club like Richmond.
Well, it's very, very simple. My father took me to the 1943 grand final, which was out at Carlton, because it was during the war. And it's interesting, Jack Dyer ran out first. And I wonder if Dick Reynolds had run out first. Well, I might have been an Essendon supporter, but I just was mesmerised by Jack. I was about age 7, and I just saw this giant of a man with these knee bandages and things, and he was God to me.
Were you a Richmond supporter in those days?
Well, I wasn't any. I was 7. But I was a Richmond supporter from the moment he ran out down the race. But I've said, repeating myself, if Dick Reynolds had run out first, I might have been an Essendon supporter. But Richmond won that game in 1943.
It is interesting because in 43 they made the finals a couple of years later, in 47, but they hadn't made the finals, actually, since 47 till the time you arrived.
Exactly. Actually, if you take out 47, they were beaten by Fitzroy in 44. It was 23 years since Richmond supporters, apart from that brief, I think they were beaten by Fitzroy in 47, hadn't seen their team play in the final for 23 years.
Yeah. And when you came here, about that time, it was Ray Dunn, who was a great legal man, a criminal lawyer.
Right.
I'm not saying he was a criminal, he was a criminal lawyer.
Right.
He took over as president of the Richmond Football Club.
Yeah.
And gee, there were a lot of changes going on, weren't there?
Well, I think that a lot of people, including Ray Dunn, Graham Richmond, were just sick and tired of Richmond, with due respect to other people involved. I suppose you can say in the 50s and 60s, or the 50s and early 60s, are the easy beats, you know. Richmond had great teams, but they just never made the finals, and they were a great disappointment to supporters like myself, and that's all I was, a supporter, prior to 64, and until Graham and I, when we were at school together, they both barracked for Richmond, you know, sort of. There weren't very many Richmond supporters at Geelong Grammar. There were only Geelong guys who came from the Western District, or Melbourne supporters. But there was probably 2 or 3 or 4 of us there.
Actually, Ray Dunn followed a great personality in Maury Fleming. Because Maury was secretary, he was treasurer, committeeman, he was everything. And took over the presidency. But Richmond, they were a great social club. But they just weren't winning matches, were they?
Exactly. Everyone enjoyed themselves and had a nice time, but they didn't win on Saturday afternoons, which, look, all you're about is winning on Saturday afternoons.
And at that time, Ray Dunn brought in Len Smith, the brother of Norm Smith, the famous coach of Melbourne, as the coach here. And really, the changes that came about were pretty monumental, weren't they?
Well, dramatic. Yeah. Len was a hell of a man, you know. I just, tragic way he died, but I think he's one of the nicest gentlemen I've ever met in my life.
You know a lot about football too.
Yeah.
What about Ray Dunn? He was...
Ray was...
Without much respect, he was a pretty ruthless operator, wasn't he?
Well, he was that, but he also had a very quick mind. Obviously, he's a leading lawyer in the city, but he... ruthless, that's fine, but also is a very, very quick man, quick to size up a situation, any situation, social or otherwise.
Well, see, you were a young bloke on the committee in those days. Were you overawed by somebody like Ray Dunn?
No, you could never be overawed by Ray, because Ray was very good, but Graham and I were in our early 30s then, or about 30 years of age. In 64, and Ray knew that young desperados like us had the energy, and there's no question Ray delegated and used Graham and myself a lot to do a lot of the league work because, you know, Ray was not an athletic man and he was probably in those days in his mid-50s. So, no, I wasn't overawed because he did use us and he really sort of, no question what Ray's goals and aims were about this football club, and that was there, number one. Yeah. And I wasn't. I suppose initially I might have been overawed, but we became friends, I suppose, and it was the whole committee became a bunch of friends with one aim, you know. And Ray let us all know what that was.
Well, when he took over, you were playing here in this. We're in the committee room now, the Richmond Football Club, or the boardroom. But the ground out there is a pretty small ground, the Punt Road Oval. But he had plans to move lock, stock and barrel to the MCG. Now, there were a lot of guys on the committee, I don't know whether you're included in this, who didn't believe it feasible to move to the MCG, to play your home matches.
Michael, with due respect, wasn't a lot of people, some people on the committee, but no, the vast majority of us knew that that was the right way to go. And I mean, when the history of the Richmond Football Club's written in 100 years' time, I think it'll still be there that one of the major things that the club ever did in its history, and then in 100 years it'll be 200 years old, was the move to the MCG. Yeah. And I think when you say the majority of the committee certainly knew that was the right way to go. But I remember when we actually moved, I think we got about 60 or 70 irate letters from members and supporters saying, you know, my grandfather took me to Punt Road in 1925 and it's our heritage and everything else. And we got a lot of opposition from people who thought maybe we were losing our own sort of history and heritage. But as you probably know, this Richmond ground is in the Melbourne City Council area anyway. It's not in Richmond at all. And I mean, with due respect, when it went into a massive move like Fitzroy and North Melbourne moved to Coburg and something else, we moved 200 yards across the road. And the major thing was that apart from the fact that the finals are played there and it's good to have that as your home ground, our supporters looked at football in great comfort. I mean, with due respect to this magnificent sort of heritage we've got here, grandstands are pretty hard on your backsides, and if you got up there, but if you didn't get up there, you stood in the mud and the blood and the beer and the outer. Yeah.
You're a pretty smart lot, really, the new regime, because you started to recruit players who were specifically designed for the MCG. Tall wingers, long kicking guys, fast runners, didn't you?
Well, Graham was mainly responsible for that. I certainly assisted Graham in going up the country with him and holding his hand. But let's make it quite clear, Mike, Graham was the man that selected the sort of players we needed. And I make no apologies for saying that Graham's got to go down as one of the greatest recruiters in league history. But it was basically Graham made the decision of who we wanted. He certainly sent us, and I went with him, and other people went. Ron Carson was another one. We went with him. But Graham basically made most of those decisions.
Is it true to say that Ray Dunn, as president, didn't mess around with a lot of committeemen? He actually came back and threw the signed deal down on this table over here and said, well, I've signed with the MCG. How do you vote? That sort of attitude?
Well, it's pretty much like that. No, it's not a myth, but I think you've over-dramatised it, but that's basically correct. Yeah. But I mean, there's certainly a number of us knew about it, and a number of us were in those negotiations.
Tell me this, did he always consult the committee? That's the point I'm trying to make. Or did he do it and then tell you later?
I think that there's no question that that was a fait accompli, us moving to Melbourne. And he was fairly democratic when it suited him, and very autocratic when it didn't suit him.
You're entitled to your own opinion as long as it agreed with his.
Yeah. But you know, let's
face it. Remember, I knew him too.
Oh, there's no question about that. But he was very autocratic at times. But I rarely, and there certainly were sometimes I disagree with him, but I really disagree with him because we're all going for that same goal. To get Richmond to win on Saturday afternoons and perform in the MCG in September.
You know, when you look at this club, Richmond, I've often said this, out of all the clubs associated with football, this club has probably produced more characters than any other. Right. You look at your Charlie Calendars and so on and so on. You know, what a character Charlie Keller,
Oh.
the late Charlie Keller, the property steward.
Well,
He
he's a
made
legend.
that an art form, didn't he?
Well, that's right. He was a permanent fixture in the Victorian side, and woe behold anyone had tried to pinch his job.
Oh, yeah. He was also on the committee.
Yeah, committee for, I wouldn't know. If you told me 50 years, I'd believe you.
I bet you always voted with him.
Well, Charlie had a habit of arriving a little late for committee meetings because he used to enjoy the bar at the cricket club, I think, and we didn't always see Charlie here on time at committee meetings. But sometimes, you know, he arrived very late.
Yeah.
But he was one of the legends of the club, and you know, one of the things that people will always think about Richmond, that is Charlie Callender.
Right, let's get to your actual involvement from 1964, 65. In 65, Richmond finished 5th. There was only the final four in those days. But that's when the league approved Richmond's switch to
Yeah.
the MCG. That was a pretty big deal in those days,
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
it?
Oh, the league weren't. It wasn't unanimous for the vote. A lot of clubs were very anti us going to the MCG.
Which clubs?
Oh, I think Hawthorn was one of them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mike, I can't remember the others, but you know, Ray done persuasiveness, and managed to sort of get the majority of the league clubs to see our way.
In those days, you were drawing sort of average crowds here
Yeah.
at the Punt Road Oval. But as soon as you went to the MCG, everything lifted, didn't it?
Yeah, I think that there's about three things responsible for that, though. One, going to the MCG certainly didn't hurt, but we had exciting players who were an attacking side, and we worked on the basis that we would kick more goals than the opposition. Plus the fact, very important, we started winning football games.
Yeah.
And people who were around the club or supported Richmond in the 30s, and Dyer's great era, and Jack Titus and people like that.
Yeah.
You know, when you win football games, they come out from under stones.
Yeah, yeah.
So the three things, the MCG certainly was a major thing. B, Graham sort of recruited very exciting players. And C, we won footy games on Saturday afternoons.
You know, you can almost overlook it, unless you're careful, the influence of Graham Richmond as a motivator
Yeah.
with players and committeemen, whatever.
Everybody around the
Ground
place.
staff, the whole lot.
Boot studders, everything.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, look, I make no apologies to anyone saying that Graham, without a doubt, would be the finest football administrator I've known. And that's not me saying that because I'm his great friend. I certainly rank Alan Swab as near equal to him, and they're two fine people. I mean, Richmond were very lucky to have Graham and Swabby around the place to sort of kick us along and direct the way the club should be going with the sort of players we needed to be successful in the MCG.
Your first year here as a committeeman, another guy came on the scene, Kevin Bartlett. Played his first game in 65. Can you remember him as
Exactly.
with hair?
Yes, do remember the hair. And I remember that year we played about, Graham was desperate to get a couple of good rovers for Richmond. You know, I think we might have played 10 or 15 rovers, different rovers that year, and we chased blokes from Tasmania, Ballarat, Unadata, everywhere, and these fellas came and went. And Graham said, "Hey, Cocko, they've found some young fella that lives in Lennox Street, Richmond."
Just over the road.
Yeah, and KB arrived, and of course, what a career, 403 games and 5 premierships, hell, you know.
And Len Smith was then coach, but
Yeah.
in 65 he had that setback because his health wasn't too good.
Had a
and
heart attack,
Jack Titus, former great player here at Richmond, took over as
Caretaker coach, yeah.
Well, that was a big setback to your
Yeah,
plans,
it
wasn't
was. But I think we were very, very fortunate this way, that when Graham recruited Tom Hafey, who was a Shepparton football coach, former player from here, Len was still alive, and there's no question, I'm sure Tommy Hafey would agree, that Len's style of play and pattern of play in football and how Richmond should be going about it made a great deal of influence on Tommy. And Len fortunately lived for a period after that first heart attack, and certainly established a great liaison with Tommy, and Tommy was smart enough to listen to Len's advice.
Well, that was in 1965, and then in 1966 you appointed, not you personally, but the committee, got Tommy Hafey as coach.
Yeah.
Now tell me truthfully, where was he on the list of priorities?
Well, I think that was another one of those autocratic sort of decisions that Ray done and
Now,
Graham.
come on, don't give me
Graham,
all the
I think that
political stuff,
Graham and Ray had that very well sorted out before it came to my ears, and I think that Graham convinced Ray that Tommy Hafey was the sort of bloke who was a fitness fanatic, certainly had great success with Shepparton, and was the sort of person that would listen to Len Smith. And I think by the time it got to me, that Graham had already convinced Ray, and once that happened, I think we just put our hands up. I think that I wasn't terribly involved in the initial things, although Graham personally had spoken and saying that he thought it was a good idea, and I said, look, don't have to convince me, mate. RH is the man to convince, and of course he did that.
Well, that's what I was getting at earlier, that Ray Dunn and Graham Richmond really made the decisions. And you guys, if you didn't go along with it on the committee, you're in a bit of trouble.
That's basically correct. I mean, we certainly had some differences. I mean, Graham and Ray had massive differences in 1969 when they had a minor World War III between the two of them, but that was sorted out pretty quickly. But I think the one thing that we endeavoured to do here is to ensure whatever differences we had, and there were differences actually, Mike, it wasn't always smooth sailing, stayed in this room, you know. But there was a couple of incidents where things got out, and when it was established who let him out, you didn't see the fellow again. He seemed to disappear.
Well, that's a sign of a good club, isn't it?
So whilst we had differences, they stayed in this room.
Yeah. Would it be fair to say from 65, 66 era we're on now, Richmond finished 5th on the ladder, half a game out of the 4, so things were improving. But there was a fierce, almost an obsession to get victory here.
Oh yeah, there's no question about that. Well, we'd just been starved of it. I mean, 23 years in the wilderness, apart from that brief period in 47, we got belted hell out of by Fitzroy in the first semi-final. You know, I think it was frustration, ambition, whatever. We just were sick and tired of Richmond just not being on the MCG in September.
A lot of people around the club had really just accepted the whole thing, hadn't they?
I don't know that they did, but...
Well, they hadn't done much about it.
It didn't do much about it. You're quite right. It sort of seemed to be a happy place here, Richmond. Yeah. Everyone laughed and smiled. You had a few drinks after the footy.
Great social atmosphere.
Yeah. But there were a few of us that were desperate to see Richmond play on the MCG in September.
Well, somebody must have got off their bottoms, because in 66 you had people like Royce Hart coming in, Francis Burke, Kevin Sheedy. So the recruiting mob were doing a pretty good job.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I think Graham had a network of people all over Australia with, you know, Simon Harry Jenkins from Hobart saw Royce. I remember Graham sent me over on a journey to talk to Royce at Clarence Football Club, and the president of the coach of Clarence was Stuart Spencer.
Yeah, now Melbourne.
Yeah, I sort of walked into this Clarence Football Club, which was a glorified tin shed, and Stewie wasn't happy to see anyone from Richmond, particularly me, and gave me an earful, but we got Royce across, and the rest's history. I mean, if I'm ever asked who the best 2 players I've ever seen play, it's Royce Hart and Ian Stewart. And sometimes when I tell Royce this, he said, look, I think you're probably right. He said, I'm not so sure about Stewie sometimes. But he made a legend.
Yeah, oh, he's a magnificent player.
Yeah.
Tell me this, what did you actually pay him to come to Richmond? Now, I know his story, so be careful what you say. How many shirts?
It wasn't a lot. I think a shirt and a suit or something. It wasn't too much.
He never got the suit, though, did he?
I don't know.
Come on.
I really don't know the answer to that, Mike, but certainly it wasn't. It's not very much, and you know.
You promised him 6 shirts and he got 1.
Is that right?
And he never got the suit.
Well, I can't argue that one. I
promise you, that's right. So you're pretty rough old crap in those days. But in 67, everything came together. Richmond premiers, I'll give you the score. Richmond 16-18, 114, defeated Geelong 15-15, 105. Yeah. And the catch cry here was, Tigers on victory, we thrive, just eat 'em alive.
Right.
Who actually thought that up?
I honestly can't tell you that, Mike. I don't know, but I was around when I was president for a number of premierships, but there's no question in my mind, even though I was a junior committee man, 67's the biggest thrill of my lifetime. Because we just never been there before. I'd never seen Richmond play on the MCG in a final. And the feelings, even just talking about it with you, bring great, wonderful emotional feelings back to me. It's just, I can remember being down at the race when the boys came in, and Ron Garraway, a senior committee man at that stage, said to Tony Jewell, gee, Tony, this must be unbelievable. You were playing at Oakley a year and a half ago to play in a league premiership side. Must have achieved your greatest ambition. And Tony Riley looked at Garra and he said, not quite, he said. I'm after a Brownlow.
Oh, really, Tony Jewell?
Yeah.
That was a bit ambitious.
Yeah, well, he might have been the best player. The fairest might have been questionable, you know.
But what a centre line you had in those days.
Yep,
Barrett in the centre, Dick Clay on one wing, and Francis Burke on the other. And that was the start of really tall, vigorous guys playing in those positions. And normally a wing was a small, fast guy, wasn't he?
I think that was one of Graham's...
Graham Richmond.
Yeah, and Len Smith maybe a bit, but I remember Graham always felt that if you had a tall fella with pace, he'd always beat a small fella with pace. Certainly worked out. I remember, you know, Geelong had, Polinelli was one of the wingmen, but and he very good player, but I suppose when he was playing on Francis or Dick, who were 4 or 5 inches taller than him, by the end of the day, I must have felt they were about 6 feet taller than him.
The role of a committeeman, as you were, well, with due respect, say a junior committeeman.
Oh, I was then, certainly, yeah.
What was your involvement? What was your contribution towards the premiership?
Well, I actually was my official job was reserve grade manager, which was a lot of fun because you saw the new kids come into the club and that sort of thing. But Ray and Graham used me on specific tasks to go and talk to different players, mothers, fathers, and convince them that the boys should be in the black and yellow Guernsey and that sort of thing. And so they used me in those sort of... And apparently, not that I knew at the time, they both had plans for me to do bigger and better things. They didn't bother to tell me these things. But I think that getting back to 67, if you looked at the Richmond side that ran on the field, there were a few household names there like Barrett and Swift. But if you looked at the Geelong side, you know, Polly Farm was captain, Billy Goggin was playing, Doug Wade centre-half forward, Peter Walker centre-half back, Dennis Marshall was playing. What's that top half forward? Sharrock. I mean, they were, if you looked through them in 67, they had all the big names. I mean, our fellas made names for themselves after that, but it was a hell of a year, Mike. That was just unbelievable. I just can't describe it. I can't put it into words, just my own feelings about.
You're like the cat that just had a bit of cream, actually.
Yeah, I just loved it all.
Well, the late Fred Swift was captain. He played a full back in that particular premiership. But this is something that's always stood out in my mind. You weren't a sentimental club because you'd sacked Neville Crowe, as captain. He'd been captain for years here, and you sacked him.
That was for a very good reason. Which
you wanted to win a premiership?
No, it wasn't that. No, it was a disciplinary reason. I'd prefer not to go into the details, but, you know, he had a misdemeanour on a club trip the year before, and it was something that happened in a public place, and Ray Dunn and Graham Richmond and the committee just decided that that wasn't the way we should go. But it wasn't anything to do with Neville's playing ability, let me assure you of that. It was a disciplinary measure that happened on a trip away.
I'm not suggesting it was anything to do with his playing ability, but you did appoint a pretty tough bloke as captain, didn't you, Fred Swift?
Well, there's nobody tougher. You'd ask Johnny Peck that, couldn't you?
Yeah, well, that wouldn't be by accident.
Or Murray Wiedemann.
That's right.
Yeah, I just think that wasn't accidental. He was appointed, but it certainly was for another reason that Neville was relieved of the captaincy the year before.
Actually, you went on with this years later, but that was the introduction in that year, 1967, of zoning regulations.
Well, that was designed, I think, to thwart the talents and abilities of Graham Richmond.
But you weren't even big time in those years.
But I think people knew we were getting some good players from extraordinary places, and Graham had a network of friends in the country that if somebody played a pretty good game, Graham knew about it on Sunday morning, and normally was up there Sunday afternoon. And I think that the league could see that we'd done very well. Graham was just tireless in recruiting. Ron Carson helped him a lot too. I certainly made some trips with Graham, but Ron and Graham must have travelled thousands and thousands of miles over the country, and I think the league could see that we were amassing every player you heard about the country.
When you say the league, do you mean the people who run, or in those days ran the VFL, or other clubs?
Both. I think that they could see what was going on, and they felt this had to be regulated, and then they brought in zoning, and that certainly was supposed to change the zones every 3 years and all that sort of thing, but in some way they said that to change the zones you had to have a 3/4 majority, and to bring in zoning was a simple majority. We finished up with Mildura, which was 370 miles away. I mean, Hawthorn got Frankston, bloke can jump on a train to come to Melbourne to training. Our Mildura is 370 miles away, or 50 miles away.
Now listen, this really
and
they'd
make it quite clear, my word it did. I mean, there were clubs bringing blokes up from Frankston on trains to come to training, and our nearest player was somewhere 300 miles away from Melbourne. And they said they'd change them every 3 years, but of course they didn't change it ever. We finished up with
Didn't help Carlton either. They were a top club.
Bendigo. Bendigo's a lot closer than Mildura. Believe me.
Well, no, geographically it is, but what about players? You picked up some good ones. You picked up one great player by accident, actually, Mervyn Kane. Now, Graham Richmond and Swabby went up to sign some superstar in Mildura who never played a league game, and bumped into Merv Kane in the street of Witchyproof.
That's right. They said, wait in the street corner, we'll talk to you. Yeah.
He wasn't a bad player, was he?
Well, you have some luck in time.
Let's go to that 67 grand final, I guess. Would that be your most outstanding memory of football, your first premiership involvement?
Yeah, to me it was.
Really?
I mean, I certainly had great pleasure in I was president for 3 premierships, so that gave me great joy. But the fact that it was the first, and to say, not just for me, but all Richmond supporters, to see Richmond win a premiership on the MCG in its very first year in the finals for 23 years.
Yeah. Well, 1968, you came back to earth with a bit of a thud because you finished 5th, half a game out of the 4. What was wrong? Did you become complacent?
Look, I suppose people from the outside would be better judges. I don't think we did, but something happened. Certainly internally I didn't see anything that happened that I could recognise as being big-headed or complacent. But subconsciously maybe that was the reason. I really couldn't honestly answer that question, Mike. Certainly internally I didn't see any change in the way we did things, and we were just as desperate and ambitious to get this player and that player.
And you had a record club membership in that year,
yeah,
68.
Well, that's people from the 30s and Jack Dyer's era and that sort of thing came out from under stones once Richmond started.
The money started to roll in, didn't it?
Yeah, I really don't think there's a lot of money in football in those days. I can't remember the balance sheets at 69. But
well, you bought some land at Torquay, which was pretty...
Yeah, that was ambitious.
Flash,
that was Ray's idea. Ray wanted a summer training camp,
Dunn,
and we bought that land at Torquay. And but I think we paid 6pence halfpenny for it. I mean, we're not talking about big dollars, Michael. We really weren't. But, somebody from outside might have detected something that we were complacent. I didn't detect it here, though, inside the footy club. I certainly didn't.
Well, you stirred things up because in 1969 you were premiers again. You defeated Geelong again. You must have had a hate on them. 25-17, 167 to 7-7-49. You just didn't beat them. You annihilated them. Graham Richmond stepped down as secretary.
Yeah.
And our old mate Alan Swab came in as secretary. He fell on his feet, didn't he?
Well, Graham, retirement was planned, and like everything that Graham does, he had Swabby lined up in the wings to step straight in, and I remember him telling me, he said, look, Cocko, he said, I'm going to have to get out of this. I'm planning on going to a career in hotels. He said, but I've got a top fella to take over from him. And I'd only met Swabby once before, but of course that started not only a great association in football, but you know, Alan and Graham and I have been lifelong friends, and probably two of my best friends of my life are Graham Richmond and Alan Swab.
Well, Swabby was assistant secretary at the St Kilda Football Club
Yeah.
at the time, wasn't he?
He'd done a stint at the league too, I think.
Yeah, as an office boy.
Yeah.
Not a very good one, but he was an office boy.
Well, you can tell. I don't remember those days.
He's not here to defend himself. Now, tell me this. I can quite vividly remember all this because I was at Channel 7 at the time. I was coming down here getting interviews, and unbeknownst to you, my chief informant was your property steward.
No doubt about
Charlie
that.
Callender. He used to tell me everything, and you guys could never find out where I was getting the information. But you were going to sack Tom Hafey as coach, weren't you? Now, was that a ploy?
Now, look, I don't know that's actually right.
On,
I think Michael, certainly we had a very bad mid-season flop, and certainly Ray Dunn wanted to pull Tommy Hafey into this committee room and work out what was going on, and there was certainly some criticism of Tommy Hafey. Now, I wasn't close enough to the scene then, but that caused a falling out between Graham and Ray Dunn, which at the time was fairly massive.
Graham Richmond was sticking with Tom Hafey?
Oh, yeah, and felt that it would be wrong to virtually mat Tom Hafey before the committee. And Ray, I think Pat Kennelly was on the committee in those days. And
Senator Pat Kennelly.
They were great manoeuvres.
Oh,
and there was certainly some, I'm not trying to be secretive about this, but there was certainly not a move to sack him, but a move to sort of put him under great pressure.
There was headlines in every paper. There was headlines on Channel 7 because I made the headlines there. I know what I'm talking about.
Well,
Hafey's going to be sacked.
I don't think that was ever going to happen, Michael, but there were certainly rumblings of Hafey had to sort of change the ways that he handled. Tommy was never good at handling committees, you know. I mean,
he didn't like committees.
I think he
doesn't
even now.
like committees.
But there was certainly, I think it's a bit dramatic to say that he was ever going to be sacked. Yeah. I don't think that was ever on. But there's certainly some criticism of him, and you know, Tommy doesn't like criticism.
All right, now let's not play with words. It was a little ploy by Graham Richmond to band the players and Hafey closer together.
If it was, I wasn't in the ploy. Could well be. Could well be. But I think there was certainly internally here some disagreement with the way Tommy was handling things, and then of course, if you remember, we went through and had to win every game to make the finals.
Well, there was a place just up the road here, Ron Carson's garage. You mentioned him before. I met him, and a lovely man. All the players used to get there and have a drink, didn't they?
Yep.
And Tom Hafey would come in and drink tea.
Tea, exactly.
But that was a great place to...
Well, it
a
bonded.
bonding place, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was. It was Ron probably unwittingly sort of really had developed with his in his garage there a great feeling of or fraternal or brotherly sort of love with all those fellas who used to go across there and have a couple of beers. Yeah.
Tell me this, the 1969 side of Richmond, I've got my own personal opinion. I reckon it was about the greatest football side I've ever seen. Would you go along with that? People say the 56 Melbourne side was the greatest in modern era. But
I wouldn't argue that because I'm a Richmond devotee, but I suppose that you could never really put down Eric Moore as one of the top full forwards, even though he played a magnificent game. But I think classically Richmond wasn't a great side. It was a great playing side. And certainly we came from fourth and had to beat Geelong, Collingwood, and then finally Ron Brassey's Carlton coach side, and that was a great thrill, you know. And that was a good game of footy. I mean, they developed tall wingmen. Remember Quirk and Quirk, and who was the other fellow on the other wing?
Robertson.
No, he was in the centre.
Crane,
Gary Crane. And of course that they had the idea of getting taller wingmen, and it's a great game of football. But I must say that in the three-quarter time, even though we were slightly behind, I just never thought after that we'd lose that game. Carlton looked a bit tired, and
It was Carlton you defeated, wasn't it? I've got Geelong down here.
No, we beat them in the first semi-final, and then we beat Collingwood, and then we beat Carlton in the grand final.
That's right. Okay, well in 1970, you finished sixth. Now you've gone from premiers to sixth position. What happened?
Well, once again, I sort of, I can't identify anything internally we did differently. But as you said before, and I'm certainly free to admit this, maybe subconsciously we relaxed a bit and took things a bit easy. But internally I couldn't say there was anything, we didn't change anything, we didn't do anything differently.
You got off to a bad start, Queen's birthday.
I don't even talk about that. That's terrible.
Talk about it. In front of Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Philip. Here you are, the reigning premiers.
We had a great theory that we were going to make a lot of money selling membership tickets. We organised 4 May Nicholas vans to be at strategic points outside the MCG. I was stuck in one with Ron Garraway, and we thought we would sell 1 million tickets. The first game on a Sunday, we were reigning premiers. Fitzroy weren't too hot in those days. And I can remember sitting in this very hot May Nicholas van with Ron Garraway, who smokes equally as much as I do, and we were asphyxiating ourselves, and I think 2 and a fat boy came and bought tickets. Well, that's wrong, but it wasn't a big success, the ticket sales, and I went to take some money into Ron Carson, who was the treasurer at the time, and Garra had a portable little radio, and I said, this has been a distinct failure, this membership ticket drive. He said, forget about that, he said, we've been belted hell out of it in the football field. And I didn't see the first half of the game because we were out in these vans on this big coup we're going to make to get this dramatic ticket sales drive. That was a failure, and of course we got belted hell out by Fitzroy.
Well, it wasn't the Queen's birthday, but the Queen was here.
Queen was here, yeah. It was a Sunday game.
Yeah. Big deal, wasn't it?
No, it was terrible, Mike. It was the worst time of my life. How did
Fitzroy beat you?
I didn't see the first half. I was stuck in some cash van trying to sell membership tickets.
You've always got an excuse, haven't you?
Well, I saw the second half, and I can assure it was miserable.
It didn't get any better in the second
that's
half.
right. It got worse.
So, the only team to be beaten in front of Her Majesty the Queen.
Yeah, I suppose that's a first.
It is, certainly. All right, well, 1971, you made the preliminary final. St Kilda defeated you 16-12, 108 to Richmond 12-6, 78. That was the year Ray Dunn died.
Yes.
And Al Board took over as president. It was pretty dramatic, you know, because leadership in a football club is of paramount importance, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. But we had a very good infrastructure by that stage. I think you've missed out something. Something quite dramatic happened shortly before Ray died, or a year before. We swapped Barrett for Stewart. And that was a dramatic thing in football. And that happened the year before. And I can remember when this actually occurred. I think it was the annual meeting in 1969. It's been publicised by you fellas in the media.